So welcome everybody, welcome to Amir for our fourth session, psychological recovery, a very important subject, We really want to support people professionally, efficiently, and really our idea is to help them get back to normal and sort of get their recovery as quickly and as smoothly as possible. So I welcome very much our wonderful colleague who is for the fourth time in Poland. I understand, Joe.
That's right.
This is your fourth time. And I hope there will be many more.
I do too.
And thank you very much. We had a wonderful first talk. Lots of information, and no doubt we will be able to hear a lot and learn a lot from you this time. So thank you very much for sharing. Thank you for being so generous. And if I may just have one tiny little request, is because you've got so much to say and the session with you is so intense, could I just ask you to sort of slow down a little bit, because we are very glad that among the participants we've got Ukrainian colleagues, and as we all know, and we are really with them because they're having tremendously difficult time. So in order to sort of grasp everything and really follow everything, perhaps we can do it in such a way that we can all concentrate and be with you. So thank you very much again, and we are with you.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I am honored to be a person who can speak to you about my thoughts on how you might assist the refugees. And I will try to go a little bit slower than I usually do, and please feel free to slow me down at any time. I'm going to speak quite a lot, obviously, today. And so I would like to invite you to ask questions at any time. Certainly just speak and ask questions, but also put them in the chat or so that our translators can translate them. And I'm happy to take questions all throughout, or any comments you have as well. So I spoke to you, I think it was last week, and I talked a little bit about psychological first aid, which is the piece of a response to refugees or disaster survivors that takes place very early. It was designed for the first hours and days, but the principles are valuable for many months. But what was important about psychological first aid, it assumes that you might only have a single helping conversation, because you might be outreaching and going places, visiting a refugee family in a host home, or perhaps going to a place where people have been gathered for some service. Today, I'm going to talk about something a little different. I'm going to talk about brief counseling. I would call these intermediate intensity counseling approaches. So this is designed to fill a gap between psychological first aid, which is single session, going out, talking to people, giving people brief help, supporting them and directing them towards resources in the community. And on the other end, we have psychotherapy. There might be full psychological interventions for PTSD or severe depression or suicide risk or other problems, where an individual would go and meet with a counselor, a psychologist, or other mental health professional for a period of time, often several months. We felt in the United States in disaster response that it was important to create something in between, because many people never get to long-term psychological counseling, either because that counseling costs money, or there's not enough counselors available, or they're reluctant or embarrassed to go for psychological counseling. They see it as weak, or just don't, or are too busy, for example. So we thought, and on the other hand, one contact with information support is not likely to be intensive enough help for someone who is at risk for developing chronic PTSD or chronic problems. So our idea was to create something that was perhaps 5 sessions in length, that was a little bit easier to offer, would also enable a mental health provider or paraprofessional counselor to support more individuals than they could do with individual psychotherapy. So I'm going to describe an intermediate intensity brief counseling intervention called Skills for Psychological Recovery. It was developed by a team of people, about 10 people, at the US National Center for PTSD and also the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. I was one of the developers. I'm also going to briefly refer to another intermediate intensity intervention created by the World Health Organization that I'd like to draw your attention to. It's called Problem Management Plus, or PM Plus. It's interesting because it has been designed for delivery by lay people, by refugees themselves, or people living in disaster affected communities, people who are not mental health professionals. Skills for Psychological Recovery, we've always intended to be delivered by either mental health professionals or helping professions or paraprofessionals, people that may not be trauma specialists, but are involved with supporting people in different ways. But I'm going to describe both approaches and talk a little bit about strengths and weaknesses. I also am going to talk to you a little bit about training and consultation and supervision support, because I think that many of you as psychologists will need to play a role not only in providing services yourself to an affected refugee, but also in training and supporting other people with less mental health background who are not professionals or who have less expertise in trauma. And then I'll finally say a few comments about going to scale and reaching large numbers of people. So I've kind of said that we can think about a continuum of care, a stepped care, where some services go to everyone, some go to people at risk, and some are the most intensive ones only are offered to people whose problems last and become more serious. And so at the most general level of response to refugees in Poland or in Ukraine, we would want to do any kind of public education, which is possible: media, radio, newsletters, handouts, written materials. And one level down from that, which goes out to as many people as we can, is psychological first aid. Skills for Psychological Recovery is for people that when you meet with them, you think, this person needs more than just very brief support and direction to services. I am concerned about this person. I see things that make me worry that they may go on to have continuing difficulties. Now we know some things to look for, and your instincts will be very good about this, but also our clients, the refugees themselves, can make that selection, because if they feel they need help, they should also be able to seek these brief counseling approaches. So what I'll notice about it are several things. First, it's a training in a series of skills. It's skills training. It's not non-directive listening. It's not very much trauma processing or working through the trauma, partially because it was assumed when it was developed that that part of what we need to do is get people to take active control of their own coping and try to tackle some of the real problems that they have. And we also noted that in many of the evidence-based psychotherapies for PTSD and depression and other problems, there was often skills training, skills in a variety of things. So that skills for psychological recovery includes 5 key skills. One is problem solving. Now, problem solving, when used in a 12-session intervention, is an evidence-based treatment for depression, and hence its selection. Also, many people, refugees especially, but anyone in disasters, is facing a lot of real-world problems, little problems, big problems, all kinds of problems. The second skill is activity scheduling, getting people to go out and be active, and especially to do activities which will lift their mood. And because depressed mood is a risk factor and interferes with coping, we wanted to include activity scheduling. The third skill is rebuilding social connections, social support. And we do it in a particular way. And I'm going to briefly describe these skills a little bit more so you can see how we do it. But there is a manual, and I understand that the manual has, for our Ukraine colleagues, the manual has been translated into Ukrainian. And that means also that the handouts will be in Ukrainian. That's a very important and useful resource for you. The fourth skill is managing reactions. That is kind of stress management skills. And I'll say more about that. In fact, there are 3 skills for managing stress in SPR. And the final skill is helpful thinking. We know that many people who've been through trauma begin to have many negative thoughts about the world, about themselves, about their future, negative judgments, interpretations, or appraisals, and that these things maintain a sense of continuing threat for the individual and create bad emotions. And we think that these negative beliefs are one of the things that can maintain stress reactions over time. It's also true that one of the evidence-based treatments for full-blown PTSD is cognitive therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and some other variations. So the idea in SPR is not to deliver all 5 or 8 of these skills to a person. The idea is to meet with the person, gather some information, and decide with them as a partnership which 2 or 3 of the skills that you will focus on across what we hope would be about 5 sessions of contact. And I encourage you to review the SPR manual, which is available on the National Center for PTSD website and the National Child Traumatic Stress Network website. And I have circulated to IGA and the organizers of this series of presentations some information on the Ukrainian resources. I will also note that I've just described the core skills. Another activity, which should be really considered a skill too, is information gathering. In information gathering in the SPR approach, the idea is to do a simple assessment, not a full-blown psychological assessment, but a simple one that helps provide an opportunity to discuss stress reactions and help the trauma survivor understand what their experience is, but also to identify their needs and to prioritize their needs. And then on the basis of that, to determine which of the SPR skills you and the client would like to focus on. And I just want to notice something that I think is quite important. The act of sitting down with somebody who's been through trauma, particularly recent trauma as our refugees, and identifying and then prioritizing their needs is an actual mental health intervention. One of the things that creates stress and problems for people is feeling like they're dealing with a mountain of problems. There are so many problems that people feel helpless to tackle them. And they think about one problem and another problem and another problem. Instead, we're trying to slow people down and say, okay, these are the problems. Which 1 or 2 or 3 are most important? And let's focus on those, because if you can make some progress on those, it will put you in a better position. And then we can move to the next one and the next one. So skills for psychological recovery, as I've said, is the key difference between psychological first aid is you have more time. Hopefully you have 5 sessions, but we hope you'll have more than 1 session. Also, you do more for a person with psychological first aid. You want to do more with them for skills for psychological recovery. We want to empower our clients whenever we're doing counseling with them. We want them to feel in control. We want them to own the process as much as possible. So anytime, there will be times sometimes when we can do something for a person, but it's better to enable them to do it for themselves, because then in the long run, that empowers them more, strengthens their sense of self-confidence or self-efficacy, their confidence that they are able to cope with their situation. And it's also different from professional counseling because it's fewer sessions than you would have in an actual psychological full-blown intervention. Oftentimes SPR might be delivered in the home where a refugee is living, or some place that is not an office. Whereas, for professional psychotherapy or a professional longer term counseling, it's usually going to be an office. We also intend that SPR can be delivered by a range of helping professionals and paraprofessionals, whereas we think it's only mental health professionals themselves, psychologists and so on, that are likely to deliver the psychotherapies. And we have fewer interventions in SPR. We have a number of skills, but you'll focus on 2 or 3 things. In psychotherapy that lasts 3 months or 6 months or a year, you have the opportunity to do more things. So I'm going to be describing a program that is focused on skills. What I want to say is it's absolutely essential that the helper be a warm, empathic person. These interpersonal skills of closeness and empathy are understood to be essential. So the skills are put on top of that. So sometimes when we advocate teaching people skills, it sometimes feels as if we're forgetting the human element. And that's not what is intended at all. You need to have the human strong relationship with a person, a therapeutic relationship, to build their trust. And so they feel understood in order to get to the skills. So the skills, though, are useful. And I'll also just say that, one of the useful things about SPR is that it's manualized, and it has a lot of things in it that make your job and the refugee's job easier. So in particular, there are all kinds of handouts for the clients themselves. They're really great. There are a lot of them on a lot of topics related to stress. And I really encourage you to, if you're able to, find a way to print those out, have them in your office, hand them to people, because very often when people who are upset are in the office with you and have been traumatized, they're going to have difficulty remembering all the things you're talking to them about. Rather, like you'll have difficulty today remembering to me talking for 2 hours. So giving them handouts is very valuable because they can take it home, they can look at it and remember what you've said. It makes it easier for them to learn. The other thing that's really important about SPR and Problem Management Plus is they are, because they're skills training, they ask people to do things between your meetings with them, between the sessions. There are task assignments, between session assignments. You can call them homework assignments. Sometimes many Americans don't like school very much, so you call it homework and they don't, it brings up bad memories for them. But they're basically, people are asked to practice things between sessions. And the whole logic of teaching a person a skill means that they need to take it, practice it repetitively so they can make it their own. I often use the analogy of learning to play a sport, like learning to play tennis. I used to teach tennis, and I can teach you, how to hit a forehand, how to hit a backhand, what the form is, and I can throw you balls. And you at first you get 2 over the net, then maybe you get 5 or 6 out of every 10 over the net. But in order for you to be able to hit a tennis ball, you have to practice for several months, 2 or 3 times a week. And then you're going to be, an advanced beginner and able to use these things. And same thing is true with woodworking tools. It's not a tool until you spend a lot of time with it and know how to use it. And the same is true of these psychological skills that we want to train people in. I want to be honest and forthright. We don't have adequate evidence for the effectiveness of SPR. There have never been any randomized controlled trials. And as someone who believes in research evidence, I'm unhappy with this state of affairs. But it is a dirty little secret of disaster mental health interventions that, in fact, almost none of them have been evaluated in any kind of rigorous way. Psychological first aid itself only recently, I think, had its first evaluation. Nonetheless, it's thought of as a best practice. What gives me some faith in skills for psychological recovery is that something very similar, the PM plus problem management plus World Health Organization intervention, has been evaluated many times over now. There are a number of randomized controlled trials, and that give us a very strong reason to believe that this kind of approach can be effective for people. But there was an SPR evaluation, a naturalistic evaluation conducted by the National Center for PTSD of disaster mental health counseling programs. And they found that the average number of visits that took place was 6 sessions. Most of the visits lasted about 60 minutes or more. There were significant decreases in the number and severity of stress reactions. The proportion of people meeting criteria for referral because they needed more assistance after SPR decreased. And the providers, the helpers, were very happy with SPR. They felt that it was giving people good skills, it was excellent in linking them with resources, and it facilitated the process of recovery. Now, that information is not adequate for us to have confidence that this is a evidence-based intervention. But let me describe now a similar intervention, problem management plus, because you will have colleagues. This is being developed and led by the World Health Organization, which, as you know, is based in Europe and is very similar. In fact, one of the developers, Richard Bryant, helped to develop SPR and then went on to be one of the developers of PM+. But World Health Organization intervention is important because it's simplified CBT. In a way, that's what SPR is too, but it's even more simplified in Problem Management Plus because the plan is to try to train and support lay people, refugees themselves, to deliver it to each other. It's transdiagnostic. It has been found in research to reduce PTSD symptoms, anxiety symptoms, and depression symptoms. And it has 4 skills, very similar to the skills in SPR. It has managing problems, which is a simplified version of problem solving. It has strengthening social support. It has managing stress, which is a slow breathing intervention. And it has get going, keep doing, which is a positive activity scheduling, behavioral activation intervention to get people going out and doing things which lift their mood. And it is designed for settings without extensive mental health services. So things like this are useful for you in the context of refugees, because if you have 2 million refugees, it will not, I think, be possible to deliver all of them a psychotherapy, even for those who have diagnosable PTSD or severe depression. A lot of people, and you probably don't have the psychological treatment workforce to do that. Therefore, these issues of thinking about brief interventions that many people can be trained to deliver become valuable for you. So the PM Plus, I'll just briefly describe. There now, I think, are 6 or 7 RCTs, including a evaluation of group delivered PM Plus. But the 2 first ones, one was a study in primary healthcare clinics in Pakistan, in conflict-affected areas. And PM Plus was compared with another usual care condition in which primary care doctors were taught to provide education, supportive counseling, medication, and referral. And the PM Plus compared to the doctor's intervention was more helpful in reducing psychological distress and improving function. And this was statistically and clinically significant. The second randomized controlled trial was done in Nairobi, Kenya, in slums, in urban slums, with women who were frequently being exposed to violence. It was delivered mostly in women's homes, and they had 209 women randomized either to PM Plus or to similar enhanced usual care. And both treatment groups displayed significant reductions in psychological distress, but PM Plus had greater reductions in distress at 3-month follow-up. And fewer women met criterion for psychological problems at the post-treatment follow-ups, and they had less PTSD symptoms and less functional impairment. So, by the way, they also found a positive correlation between the number of PM Plus sessions attended, 1 to 5, and the reduction in psychological distress at 3 months, arguing for the importance of multiple sessions, which is something I'm going to say later. If I can multitask in a minute, I'll put these two references in the chat for you, because I think that might be valuable. So some things to notice about both SPR and PM Plus. Both are brief, simplified CBT, and both focus on training individuals in coping skills. These coping skills were not chosen at random. They are skills that have been included in many of the evidence-based, the longer, more intensive evidence-based psychotherapies for different kinds of mental health problems. And both of them include multiple sessions of contact. I want to briefly talk about the importance of multiple contacts, because in the American disaster crisis counseling system, we do allow for multiple contact short-term crisis counseling. But in general, very few people receive multiple sessions. It turns out that it's difficult to attract people to come to multiple sessions. And as you know, this is often the case of full-blown mental health treatments. People come one session and then drop out right away. So we have to do everything we can with PM Plus or Skills for Psychological Recovery to try to encourage people to come for 5 sessions or so, because they will get more therapeutic benefit if they come back. And there are some good reasons for that. One is that if you have more than one contact, you can help the individual apply skills to problems. They go out and they try it, they come back, they talk to you about it. If it didn't work, you can decide why. If it worked, you can encourage them. You can keep them, you can support the process of practicing so that they do it enough to achieve a benefit with them. And you can motivate them to continue practicing. If they haven't done well, you can help to motivate them to get back and to start again. These skills require practice in order to have their effects. They are beneficial to a person because they're making changes either inside the person or in the person's world. And some simple things can be done to reduce dropout. One is when you're working with a person to explain and discuss the importance of multiple contacts and make sure that that makes sense to them in a way that they can get behind and support. It's also to set the date, time, and location for the next contact, and also write down the information and give it to the person so that they can't forget it in any way. The other thing that's important is to review the skills when people go out and do it. Your great goal in these brief counseling is to get people to go out and try new things in their community, in the world where they live. So it's very important that when the person returns to you, that the first thing you do is review how their practice went for them. What did they do? How much of it did they do? If they did it even a little, encourage it. Don't ask for perfection, because it's a process of getting a person to engage in homework. Those of you most of you are clinical psychologists. Many of you will be familiar and have used CBT methods, and you know that it is a process to sort of teach people to get involved in doing homework assignments for you, and that's a difficult thing often. If the person had success with the skill, you want to, ask a lot about that, pull it apart. What worked? What happened? What did you think? Make a big deal about it, and then encourage them to go out and do it next week. If they didn't have success, then you want to kind of go back and talk about that. What got in the way? Does the skill make sense to them? Go over that again. I say all of this because the process of reviewing between session tasks is really an important one. And I know that many CBT practitioners have a difficult time sometimes in getting people to do the homework assignments. Now, notice that there's not too much trauma processing in these brief counseling interventions. I encourage you all, of course, to deliver the trauma-focused psychotherapies. And I know that in this course series that you are attending, you're going to be receiving presentations on many of the most powerful evidence-based psychotherapies for PTSD. I know my colleague, Patricia Ruzek, is presenting on cognitive processing therapy and so on. So that's very important, because the trauma-focused psychotherapies are the most powerful ones. But I'm also suggesting that we add in these briefer counseling approaches, because they can reach more people. I think the reason it doesn't have a lot of trauma processing is there was some concern with giving people who were less experienced involvement in doing the trauma processing, because it might be difficult and challenging for them, especially if we can't train them for very long periods of time. Also, there are so many current challenges in coping that people have that we know that it's very valuable. And so focus on returning them to a better quality of life is something that will make a difference in their PTSD. And there is an exception for this in the Skills for Psychological Recovery intervention, where we do have a writing intervention where people are encouraged to write about their traumas. The other thing to notice about these brief interventions is that they're quite structured. They're manualized, they're step-by-step interventions. And there's often a reaction on the part of many professionals and non-professionals alike, about to manualized psychotherapies. It can feel like you're being tied up a little bit and not given the freedom that you want. But we built them because we thought that manualizing would help in many ways. It would make it clearer what to do, especially if you're training, if you're training other people who are not trauma specialists or not very experienced psychotherapists. And I note that in the case of approaches like Problem Management Plus, and I would argue for SPR, what's been validated in the studies is the step-by-step delivery of these interventions. And not only that, interventions where the person who is delivering PM Plus is receiving continuing training and support throughout the process. So what has been validated is something that's very carefully administered. It isn't, here's a bunch of skills, go out and try it and do it however you think, pick and choose the things that you think are valuable. So I think that you will want to integrate these with your own skills, and you will certainly want to use your own abilities and knowledge. But I'd also encourage you, if you do decide to learn and deliver SPR or PM Plus or any of the evidence-based psychotherapies, to work hard to stick with the steps that are outlined, because those are the things that we have the evidence for. Now, just a quick comment on the pathways to well-being and recovery. I talked a little bit about that in my first talk. And hypothetically, different people recover in different ways. Different people might have different mechanisms of recovery, because there are a number of things that happen to people after they've been through a trauma that are very helpful to them. Some core pathways are, working through aspects of the traumatic experience, revisiting it. The so-called trauma-focused psychotherapy is do that. Why? Because people become less fearful of going back to the memories of the trauma. One of the things that PTSD does is people become extremely agitated when remembering the trauma for good reason, right? It brings back all of the same feelings and thoughts and is very distressing for a person. But what that then does is, by being fearful of the memories, people engage in long-term, very often extreme emotional avoidance. And that prevents them in being able to remember things and face situations which are reminders of the trauma. And then that, we think, maintains the traumatic stress symptoms. And that's one of the factors that can lead to full-blown PTSD. The cognitive therapies don't go so much through what happened in the trauma quite as much, but they do open up all of the thoughts about the meanings of the trauma, how it's affected me. I'm damaged, I'm ruined for life, I'm weak, that I've developed PTSD. If they were interpersonally assaulted, you can't trust other people, people are no good, or the world is a dangerous place. Those kinds of beliefs are very common. Cognitive therapies work through those beliefs, and in that sense, and help people identify them, look at them, stand back from them, and challenge them effectively. It's a very systematic process. It doesn't happen through a brief discussion of beliefs. It happens through 12 sessions of learning about beliefs, studying them, identifying different kinds of beliefs, practicing them, identifying ways to address them and challenge them. But it's still a kind of a trauma-focused psychotherapy. Other pathways to well-being are building active coping and confidence in coping. Problem solving does that. So do many of the other coping skills. If a person feels that they can relax their body effectively, or if they feel that they know how to ask for social support, or they feel they can lift their mood by going out and doing some positive activities, that gives them confidence that they can cope, that they can manage their distress, that they can rebuild their life. And that's a powerful process in recovery after trauma. Social support is another core process, because people who are feeling active support from other people, it changes your sense of your ability to cope. It increases your sense of safety and comfort. Some of the other pathways to recovery, like calming your body through relaxation or meditation, or positive activities which lift your mood, we can sort of think of those as additional supplementary or adjunctive pathways, because they don't deal with the real problem itself. They don't deal with the fact I've been traumatized and what that means to me. They don't even deal with fixing all of the problems I have in my life right now, how to get education for my child, how to get a job, how to find a safe place to live, how to deal with my child's mental health problems. What they do is they calm your own body, that helps you manage the symptoms, or they improve your mood. But the reason they're important is that a person with a better improved mood or a calmer body is going to think more calmly. They're going to think better. They're going to be more able to cope well. So by doing these supplementary things, we empower a person to do the other things they need to do to recover. And the reason I pay a lot of attention, and the reason that calming and activities are in these counseling interventions, is because we think they are easier to deliver. It's a little bit easier to help a person to go out and change their activities and build in more positive activities. It's a little bit easier for them to learn slow breathing and relax their body than it is to rework all the meanings of the trauma. So we also want to do things that is easier to do in brief counseling and are more likely to be under the person's control, and we're more likely to meet with success. So that's why those things are in there. I also want to mention something else. In the United States, we do not have a strong tradition in disaster mental health, and not even in mental health generally, of tracking the improvements in our clients, that is, measuring outcomes as throughout the treatment process. For example, giving a PTSD checklist, every session or two to see if the person is making improvement, or a brief depression measure. That means that all the decisions that professional counselors are making are not really very well informed by whether or not the person's symptoms are reducing or their quality of life is improving. And many of us, I will say that I have a conviction, but so do many leading organizations, believe that we need to move towards measurement-based care. That is, measuring in simple ways, brief ways that are not difficult or burdensome for our clients, but both of us working together to track whether the person's key stress reactions, the things they're working on, are changing. If we've seen them in psychotherapy for 8 or 10 sessions, and there's no improvement in depression, there's no improvement in PTSD, then that's a chance for us to change things up. Also, 10% of clients in most psychotherapies for most mental health problems actually show a worsening of symptoms. And by administering brief questionnaires, we will be better able to detect worsening. And that means we can change course in the therapy. So I encourage you, as you work with your people, whether you do the brief counseling or whether you do psychotherapies, to explore using simple, validated questionnaires of the core stress reactions you're working on, whether usually that will be depression or PTSD or stress symptoms. I think that's very important. Problem Management Plus has actually built that in session by session. They have some simple measures they use. And one of the quite wonderful things they do is they have a specially created measure called Cyclops, Psychological Outcome Profiles. And in this one, the person identifies 2 of their own specific problems that they identify as problems. It could be that I don't know how to get my daughter good schooling, or something like that, a practical thing. I need a way to get transportation to the job that the part-time job I'm going to be working. Cyclops measures that and measures it in a very simple way so that you and the client can see if the client's own self-identified problems are improving. So I'm going to now talk briefly about the various skills in psychological recovery, but let me just stop for a moment and ask if there are any questions that you want to ask or share with me. And I'm also going to place in the chat, if I can, the references on PM Plus. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I think I've done it. Okay. So are there any questions or comments at this point?
Dziękuję bardzo. Państwo proszą właśnie o link do podręcznika.
Yes, the participants are asking for the link to the manual, but you've already shared it. And there's also a request for the Ukrainian version of the manual, but I think you've provided it.
So let me just ask Iga about that. I haven't put those in myself in the chat. Iga, you have those. If you are able to put them in the chat, I'll ask you to do that. If not, I can find a way to do it.
Tak, postaram się to zrobić w trakcie tego naszego.
Yes, I'll try and do it during the meeting. I'll try and find them. But if it does not work during the meeting, we will send it to the participants together with the certificates. But I hope it's going to be okay.
Okay,
and
great,
we-
because I appreciate that. I think it's very important that you have those materials. So good, thank you, Iga. Any other questions or comments?
Nie ma na ten moment.
Okay. So
For now, no other comments.
okay, so I will start by talking about the skill of rebuilding healthy social connections. You know, I really don't probably need to say much more about the importance of social support. It is probably the most centrally important coping skill, and it's vital to well-being after trauma exposure. And obviously, what we see with our refugees is a breaking up of their most familiar social supports, separated from loved ones, separating from easy communication with loved ones. I would imagine that our refugees who are being placed in Polish homes may struggle to stay in touch with each other and to meet with each other. So it's very important for you to think about that. The skills for psychological recovery, as you know, breaks most things down into steps. And what I like about the steps for building healthy social connections is that we've developed, step one is to develop a social connections map. So it's really a great way of starting a conversation with a client about their social network, about where they are right now with social connections. So in this, you just give a person a piece of paper, they put themselves, write a circle in the middle and write themselves there, and then write down lines out and circles for all the different kinds of sources of support and social connection they have. And that can include a family member, an aunt, or someone they can reach by phone, persons they are in electronic or email contact with. It can be old friends, colleagues from work, friends at church. It can be a counselor. Sometimes it can be a helping organization. If there's an organization for refugees, that's a source of help. But it can even be other things like your pet or things like that. And what this does is enables a person to write out all of their contacts. So the step one is to have them write out this map. Step two is for you as the counselor to sit down and review the map with them. And we've listed in the manual a variety of questions like, who are your most important connections still available to you? Who can you share your feelings with? Who can you get advice from? Who would you like to spend more time with? Who do you want to spend less time with? Are there relationships you want to improve? Who might need your help or support? Now, a challenge we'll face with this exercise for refugees and people in Ukraine is that we've had a breakup of social support. So doing this exercise will remind people of many of the supports that they have lost, but it also can be a place to start a helping conversation to how can they use and strengthen the existing social connections that they have, and how will they go back and rebuild some of the old ones? Are there ways that they can reestablish contact? Are there old friends or people that they could be in contact with now to support them that they just haven't been using? Like the example I often use in the United States is a person who has a great friend from when they were younger, but they live somewhere else. So they only talk with them on the phone once a year at the new year. But it would be possible for them to reach out to them and establish much more regular telephone contacts for support. Now, in doing an act like this with refugees in Poland, we have to be very sensitive to the pain of the loss of relationships and creative about how we can build that network and strengthen it and add to it. Are there organizations, other people, new friends in Poland, not only the host families, but people that are meeting? If they find a way to do some work, are there new work colleagues? And so after this conversation, in step 3, it's simply, okay, we've talked about this. What are 1 or 2 things you would like to do this week to strengthen your social connections? And each individual who's gone through this exercise can identify some specific steps that they would like to take. They make a plan to do it. You talk to them about how they'll do it, so they get a little bit specific. And you agree what they're going to do. And then, of course, when they come back next week, first thing you do is review, how did it go? If it went well, you talk about that, you unpack it, you expand on it, you see how they want to do it differently next time. Because there are a lot of things that go into having conversations with other people, and especially if you're asking for social support, what do you say? There are skills for making yourself vulnerable, for asking for help, for sharing what you're thinking and feeling. So what this skill does is just to provide a way of encouraging people to go out and strengthen and build their social connections. And the reason we only want to focus on 2 or 3 of the skills in SPR, even if we have 5 sessions, is because we want the person to go out and do it. Then we want to review it. Then we want them to do it again. Then we want them to review it. Then we want them to do it again. So ideally, you'll have 3 or 4 conversations with a person about their social networks. And each week, they'll go out and they'll try to make some changes. And you'll come in and you'll process it. And then they'll identify 1 or 2 more changes. They'll go do that. So you can see that if you have longer with them, they'll be able to experience more efforts to improve their social connections. You'll be able to help them more with that and support that. And also they'll be able to do more things. And the idea is that because these are skills, one of your jobs is going to be encouraging people to, even if they no longer have contact with you, to go out and continue doing these things. Now, in the United States context, when we designed these things, we designed them for the system of post-disaster response that exists in the United States. So very often, the number of contacts would be limited to 5 contacts because there just weren't the resources to offer ongoing support to people. But some of you, I think, are going to be meeting with survivors and refugees for more than 5 sessions because you'll be meeting them in different ways. And so you also, even if you're doing different things, if you are doing an evidence-based psychotherapy, you can do this kind of rebuilding social connections in the work you're doing. And, if you met with them for, 20 sessions across 6 months, you can keep this skill going, and you can periodically review how they're doing with the network, how they're building it, how they're seeking to strengthen it. And that way you can really see them through the process of turning a new set of activities into more of a habit. So it's something that they can continue to use across time. So that's an example of healthy social connections. In the manual is valuable because it has a worksheet for you where you can go through it and it reminds you of what to do. So you don't have to memorize all these different skills, and you can fill it out with the client, and you can give that paper to the client, which reminds them. There are client handouts that make everything a bit easier. The second skill I'll mention is promoting positive activities. Now, I'm a giant fan of this skill because by getting people to go out and do 1 or 2 positive activities each week, you can give them a chance to experience something positive in the world. It's easy when for a refugee, or when you've been through trauma, to be constantly focusing on what's bad, the worries about your loved ones, your worries about your family, your financial problems, all the your physical symptoms. It's very natural to do that. And it seems so important to focus on the big problems that you automatically, most people automatically stop doing positive activities. Sometimes it can even seem unloyal, disloyal to go out and do a positive activity, enjoy yourself, because what about all the people still left in Ukraine who are not able to enjoy themselves? But in fact, finding a way to experience some positive emotions and some positive activities, they don't just have to be fun activities or enjoyable activities. They can be meaningful activities of contributing to your community. They can be all kinds of activities that are good for the soul or good for you, that strengthen you. It can be exercise, for example. But those things, if they lift your mood and they make you feel stronger, then they help you to come back at your problems from a different place, in a more solid place. And you'll be more effective, not less effective, in tackling the serious problems that you have to tackle. Now, I always see promoting positive activities as a secondary skill. I think that the three most powerful skills of SPR, this is just my opinion, are rebuilding social connections because of how important social supports are for people. The problem solving, because problem solving cuts the mountain of problems down to size, and people can get better at solving problems. And then I think positive activities is the third important one. But positive activities should never be the first skill, because if a person's coming to you for help and you sit down and you tell them, well, I would really like to think, we want you to walk in the garden once or twice a week, or we want you to go out and have a nice coffee in a place where and meet a friend, or we want you to go watch a relaxing, enjoyable movie or something. That's going to seem sometimes trivial, like you're not listening to the person, that you don't understand the huge importance of what they're going through and what their people are going through back in Ukraine. So positive activities are something to include with almost everyone, but not as the first skill, as the second skill or the third skill, because it can be done in addition to the other things you're doing. And if you can get people to participate in positive activities, it has a good chance of very slightly and slowly improving their mood, especially if they do it over time. Very often, after disasters, and I think this will be true for the refugees, they're going to feel they're too busy coping with other problems to make time for positive activities. Or they feel so depressed and sad, they don't feel like going out and doing anything positive. Sometimes they may be avoiding reminders of disaster, which sometimes you go out in public, things remind you. Also, of course, previous positive activities might be difficult to access. Maybe you played volleyball back in Ukraine, or maybe you were a potter. And you may not have access to those things when you are displaced and living as a refugee in Poland. So people become sad, down, and depressed when they no longer engage in rewarding activities. I think it's rewarding, enjoyable activities that help all of us to get through the day and to cope. So one of your jobs with positive activities is to really try and sit down and make this make sense to a person. And that can be difficult. I started a clinic in California for traumatically bereaved persons. And we partnered with the local self-help organization for bereavement. And they would refer to us their most difficult cases, the persons who had been through terrible things, traumatic bereavements where they had found their child dead through suicide or things like that. And their emotions were so sad and so down that it is difficult to gradually persuade them to invest in some positive activities for themselves. Very often they have children. You're going to find this with you have so many women and children refugees in Poland. The women are not going to feel that they should do anything for themselves. They're going to feel that they have to do things for their children. So you are going to be facing some obstacles in getting people to invest in little positive things for themselves. But even I remember working with one woman. She had lost her husband to suicide, and she was very busy because she was working full time and she had 2 children. She would have to put them together, and she every day she was busy until 9:30 at night. But she discovered that she could run a bath for herself and put some bubbles in the bath and light some candles. And she would love just sitting in that bath for 15 or 20 minutes. It was a small thing, but a little thing she could do that was soothing, enjoyable, comforting for her. So even simple skills like promoting positive activities can be quite difficult to do, and we have to be very, very sensitive to them. So it takes great interpersonal skill and great persuasive skill to even do these skills. In the manual, there are steps. The first one is identifying and selecting positive activities. We provide a list, but in Poland, or in fact in Ukraine, where people are living in fear of assault and death, it's still important to try to build small opportunities for positive activities. But you will need to be very clever and creative to try to think what's possible now that the circumstances are very different. Obviously, there are many things that are too dangerous, but there might be other things that could be created. So the counselor in doing the positive activity skill needs to really engage in a process with the client to discover what are possible ideas, because very often the client may think back immediately to the familiar things that he or she used to do to enjoy themselves, and they're no longer possible. So our job is to try to make that a much larger list and find things that the person really thinks might be a little bit enjoyable, a little bit soothing and helpful. And so we identify the activities, and then through a conversation with the person, they select 2 or 3 that they would like to do. And then they schedule the activities in a calendar. You talk to them about when and where they'll do them. And they write it down, because writing things down is good. And then they come back next week and you review that experience. What did they do? If they did it, how did it affect their mood? And I like to tell people, your mood goes from a -10 to a 0 to a +10. If the time of trauma was a -8 or a -9 or a -10. And you are now probably at a -5 or a -6 or something. So you doing some positive activities, even if you do them every week, you might only move from a -8 to a -5, or maybe if you're lucky, you'll move from a -5 to a -1. But with time, maybe you'll move to a 1 or a 2. And so it's all valuable, and the impact of positive events will not necessarily be the first time. It might be that you have to keep doing it and keep experimenting with how to do it, but it is the long-term cumulative effect of building in 1 or 2 positive self-caring activities for yourself every week that will have the effect on your emotions, and that will improve your ability to cope more generally and to use the other coping tools that you want. As with any other between session task, your review of their efforts is really important. You really want to encourage any try that they made. Even if they started to do it and they didn't complete it, you want to encourage that and strengthen that. And then next time, help a little bit more. If they didn't do it, you really want to talk it through with them. Did it not make sense to them? In which case you want to revisit it with them and make sure that it makes sense to them to do this task. But you also want to then, what got in the way? What were the obstacles? Do you want to do it again? Yes. Okay. Well, let's look at the obstacles. What got in it last time? What might get in the way this time? Let's plan for that so you have more success. And you always want to give tasks to people that you think they're likely to succeed at. Always a task that is relatively easy, that the circumstances make it very possible for them to do it, and that you think that if they do it, it will be some kind of a positive experience for them. So that's positive activities. The third skill is building problem-solving skills. Now, I like this one, but this is a difficult one to deliver. The reason it's in there is because we can think of the task of refugees or anybody who's been through trauma has to solve a lot of problems now. And some of those problems are problems like, I can't sleep. Some of them are, I don't have transportation or income or a place to live. Some of the problems are, I'm worried about my child because my child seems to be getting angry all the time. Or I don't know how to establish contact with my loved one who is missing in Ukraine. All of these things can be seen, or I have a stomach distress. All of those things can be seen as a problem that needs solving. Now, solving is a terrible word. We shouldn't call it problem solving. In fact, I like that PM Plus calls it problem management. I suppose if I were to develop SPR again, I would call it problem management, because you don't solve. There are many of these things you don't solve. To say you can solve these problems is to minimize how big the problems are, how important they are, and how they may have very long-term effects on people. But any problem can be made slightly less of a problem, even if it's still a big difficulty. Even a person who is told they have 3 months left to live can tackle that as a problem, and they can do things to decide how they want to spend that 3 months the best way, that they want to communicate certain things to their loved ones, that they want to set their affairs in order. So problem solving is versatile. It can be used for almost anything. We also included it because there is evidence in the field of depression that 12 sessions of problem-solving training reliably reduce depression symptoms for many people. It's not a perfect treatment, of course, and it doesn't address all the things related to depression, but it's valuable. So because people face so many problems after trauma, in fact, continuing problems is a risk factor for development of PTSD. It's good to help people tackle specific problems and at least try to reduce the intensity of some of them. And the steps are formal steps. They are to define the problem, to brainstorm and come up with as many possible ways of tackling the problem as you can think of, and then to evaluate and choose the best 1 or 2 or 3 solutions. And then homework assignments, you go out and try to use it and then come back and talk about it. So you are gradually teaching a person to look at things and decide, well, what is my problem? And then to consider a range of options instead of just thinking of the one thing or the 2 things that come to mind, because that's what you've already done. So each of these steps helps improve problem solving over what most of us ordinarily do. Most of us don't take too much time to identify what is the problem specifically. Sometimes people identify problems in such a big way that they can't do anything, whereas making it more concrete makes it easier to tackle the problem. That's one of your jobs as a counselor, is to help them do that. The second thing most of us don't do is we don't generate a list of possible things we could do. But if you make that list and you try to make at least 10 or even more possibilities, it does a number of things. It helps a person come up with more creative ideas. So they might come up with some possible solutions that are better, more useful solutions than they would have thought of if they didn't go through that exercise of trying to sit down and make a list of possibilities. Also, by making a list of possibilities, it communicates something to you, something subtle, and that is, okay, should I resume talking again?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay.
We had a wonderful break. Thank you very much.
Not enough, I'm sure, but good. Well, just a quick last remark on brainstorming. So brainstorming is potentially a very, very useful skill because it is versatile and can be used for any kind of difficulty that a refugee may be experiencing. But it is a bit difficult to deliver unless you're experienced at it. So it can be difficult for a counselor to feel confident to move a person through these steps and make all the steps happen, because it's very directive, more directive than some counselors are used to. And in fact, it's so directive that, when you're doing brainstorming, it's also, there's a mini challenge, a small challenge of being able to keep the conversation going and to enable you and the client to generate the list of alternatives. And then, of course, the very important piece is the review, because you want to review how the person has done with their one or two solutions and they've gone out and tried, strengthen that, and then rethink what they need to do. If they need to do more for that problem or it didn't work, then you want to have them go do it again the next session. Or maybe if something did pretty well, you want to come, well, what's another difficulty you want to face? Let's figure out, let's go through the same exercise. What's the problem? What are generating, brainstorming the list of alternatives, selecting something on a next problem. So it can be a challenge to do it, but it's very powerful. Now I'm going to go and talk about the remaining skills, but let me just stop there and ask the interpreters if there are any questions or comments at this point, because I know that it's an awful lot of me talking.
Nie ma pytań.
There are no questions for now.
Nothing at this time? Okay. Okay, so I think it's the fourth skills area is called managing reactions, and it's basically stress management. This emotion regulation training is what we might think of it as, and this will be familiar to many psychologists. And the rationale for this is obvious. When people are very upset and having strong stress reactions, that affects their mood, it affects their ability to make good decisions, it affects their relationships, it affects their functioning, it affects health. So anything we can do to help a person reduce their stress reactions, manage their stress reactions more effectively is a good thing to do. Now, there are the steps for this one is also broken into steps. The step one is to identify the distressing reactions, and that, because this is individual for each person. What's the most important one or two stress reactions they want to tackle, and then to teach skills to address those reactions, and then create a plan. So they're going to go out and practice that skill and then come back and talk to you. So even in a simple skill like slow breathing to relax the body, it's something that has to be practiced. So you would do it, of course, in the session, but then you go and do it as homework several occasions, and you come back and talk about it, because you can get better at being able to use slow breathing to cope with stress. And that's our job in multiple sessions, is to help the person continue to practice to develop their skills in using it. Now, couple of things to mention about the skills here. The first is that there are a whole lot of really great handouts that you can get from the manual and give to clients. So for example, there's handouts on post-traumatic stress reactions, anger and irritability, sleep difficulties, depressed mood, post-disaster fears, grief reactions, how to support someone after a disaster, drug and alcohol problems. And then because we partnered with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, there's handouts for children, getting control of your fears, for parents, helping children control their fears, for parents, help for children's sleep problems, children's intrusive, unwanted thoughts and traumatic reminders, children's tantruming and acting out behavior, children in grief. So some of the useful things about the manuals are these very basic things of handouts, because there are a lot of them. They're very good. And I encourage you, you'll probably want to use handouts as educational tools with your clients in Poland. And both the PFA manual and the SPR manual have lots of really great handouts. It's one of the best things about them. So actually, there are 3 different core stress management skills that are potentially taught in skills for psychological recovery. And it's up to you in talking with the client, to decide which skill would be the one that might be valuable and be the best fit for their stress reaction. So one is calming. There's a slow breathing skill. Many of you will be familiar with this as psychologists in various forms of relaxation training. And that's obviously very, very useful if a person, is having difficulty going to sleep, or a person has headaches, or, some physical manifestation where helping a person calm their body is useful. You could use something else other than breathing. Breathing is the one that's there in the manual. But if you are skilled in progressive muscular relaxation training or some meditation or mindfulness approach, that of course is perfectly appropriate. The other 2 skills are a little bit different. The second one is putting thoughts and feelings into words, writing. So we put that in because partly some of us felt we wanted to have a way for a person to process their traumatic experience in this. I'm kind of a believer that people are processing their experience anyways. So it seems to me sometimes a little bit unrealistic to be afraid to talk to the person about their traumatic experiences. And of course, we know that's a very important path to recovery. So since we developed SPR, now there are written exposure therapy protocols that have been used for PTSD by my colleagues, Denise Sloan and Brian, I forgot Brian's last name, but they're at the National Center for PTSD, and they have a 5-session written exposure therapy protocol, which has been found to be quite effective and to be as effective as 12-session cognitive processing therapy. So writing exercises may be helpful. I'll describe them in a minute. And so there, in the sense that the skill of physical calming is for a person who is experiencing physiological stress reactions with raised heartbeat or headaches or things like that. The putting thoughts and feelings into words, the writing, is for people who are having a lot of intrusive thoughts, nightmares or intrusive reminders of the trauma, that kind of stress reaction. And then we also have one called recognizing and managing triggers. There's some clients who are experiencing very unpleasant they're getting triggered or reminded of the trauma and then having intense reactions. So they're running into situations, sights, smells, sounds that are reminding them of something that they went through. And that, that would be more likely with a person, for example, who, was during the evacuation thought they were going to die because they came under fire, or they thought they were going to be captured or something like that. So then that person might find that there are a variety of triggers that they're experiencing that are reminding them and setting off really intense emotional reactions. So we have a skill for that. So the calming skill, the breathing retraining, I won't go into that. It's basically a slow breathing protocol, and you can see the guidance of it in the manual. And there's a breathing handout, and you give them, you do it in session with them, and then you give them the assignment, and then you review it. And then with all the skills, if you do it once, if you're going to see them again, you always review it. So for example, the skill that you introduce in session 1, you would continue in session 2, 3, 4, and 5. So because skills are things that happen across time. So you don't want to just have them do a skill, talk about it 1 week, and next week totally forget about the skill. Always continue the skill and review that, and then move on to teaching them the next skill. And again, you're only going to have room for 2 or 3 skills, even if you meet them 5 times. Now, if it turns out that you meet them 15 times, then you can potentially either just continue and deepen their ability to use the skills, but you could also add another skill. The skill for putting thoughts and feelings into words, I think there's something positive about putting something into words. One thing is that it can enable you to face aspects of your experience which are frightening to you. It's a little bit like an exposure experience. By doing it, you will become less fearful about doing it, especially if you do it multiple times. And also it helps you, when you write something down, it helps you step back from it. It helps you look at it with less involvement. And especially if you write it down, you look at it a few days later, or when you're in a different mood, it looks a little different. That's helpful in the process of coming to terms with difficult things that have happened. So writing and drawing allows you to organize and better understand what's happened to you. It teaches you to cope with your memories more effectively. And it also helps you identify some of the key concerns or worries that you might want to discuss with the counselor more. So the way we do it in Skills for Psychological Recovery is to, and there's a workshop, we want them to start writing about whatever is troubling them in as much detail as they can, to try whenever they write to write for 30 minutes or so, to spend some time writing, to try to include details about feelings and thoughts, as well as some things about what have happened, the meaning of it for you, and also to try to, as part of this, repeat the writing task several times. If somebody writes once, it may just make them feel strong feelings, but if they write multiple times, you have the chance of them gradually to get used to it and to see the reduction in distress when they are doing the writing. And also, new pieces come to mind, and all of that. And it's good if they do the writing on multiple occasions to not only add new thoughts that come to mind, but also try to begin to build in new helpful thoughts that are helpful to them. And if the person doesn't feel comfortable writing, it's also possible to do this by speaking into a voice recorder, or drawing a picture, or making a piece of art, or writing a song or a poem. But have the person, in the way we've laid it out, is have them do it the first time in the session with you. Have them write it in a session, and then that way you can keep your eyes on them, support them, and they have the first time they do it, they have a bit of a sense of safety and support when they're doing it. And so that's that skill. The skill for recognizing and managing reminders is, again, figuring that for some people, there are these trigger situations. Now, not everybody has the same kinds of stress reactions, and that's why we had several of them. But the triggers can be difficult. So, what we talk about are identify what the trigger situations are. That's valuable because You know, in my mind, there are two kinds of trigger situations, right? Some that you can't predict because you don't know where they're coming to, and bam, they're there and you're in the middle of it. And that's really, really hard. But there are sometimes trigger situations you know darn well are going to happen because it stands to reason. You know, for example, like did a lot of work with veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and the Vietnam Wars in the United States. They know that if they go to a situation, many of them, where it's a family gathering or a social gathering, and there's lots of children running around yelling, they know that the sounds of children running and yelling is a reminder of bad things that happen in a war zone for them. And it's going to trigger them. Or they might know that the smell of meat cooking is a reminder. Terrible reminder of traumatic things that happen in war zones. So they can anticipate those things. And they can anticipate that if they're in busy social surroundings, it makes them uncomfortable. There's too much movement. They feel unsafe. They want to sit with their back to the wall. So if a person knows that they're going into a trigger situation, they can prepare ahead of time. They can do things, they can get ready, they can rehearse what they want to do to deal with it. Before they walk into the situation, they may be able to remind themselves of things. They can also enlist social support from a significant other, a friend, a partner, a wife or a spouse or a family member. So those things are useful. But we also train a person to, if they're upset by a reminder, to ask them to think, how is this situation now different from when I was in the trauma? What's different about it? And ask them to pay attention to that and try to draw those things to mind, because that helps them realize that it is just a reminder. They're not in the situation again. And we also teach them to get support from other people and to do things to calm themselves, like the other skills they've learned, like breathing and so on. So, and with these skills, you know, once we've identified the skill and taught them it in a session, they decide to practice it, to go out and use it, they come back, we review it, and so on. Now, the final skill of SPR is called promoting helpful thinking. And it is in some ways, very experimental. It's because it's an attempt to do an extremely simplified version of cognitive therapy. You know, cognitive therapy of identifying negative beliefs and interpretations and negative thoughts about life, the universe, and other people, and the impact of the trauma on you, we know is very important. We know that interventions like cognitive processing therapy, which focus on negative beliefs and on challenging them, and training people to do that systematically with a lot of practice, that those can be very effective in reducing PTSD symptoms and symptoms of depression. The problem is it takes 12 sessions and it takes a great deal of skill and practice on the part of the therapist. It takes a lot of work on the part of the client. So we just tried to do something very similar but simple for skills of psychological recovery. And so we teach people about the role of thoughts in affecting their well-being, and help them look at their own specific disaster-related thoughts and how they affect their feelings and behavior, and then identify and practice other ways of thinking about things that they could replace their negative thoughts with, which would also be true and honest, but would be more helpful to them. And so part of what you want to do here is with refugees, you want to find out what they're thinking about that's most upsetting. What are they saying to themselves? What are they worrying about? What are the negative beliefs? Because each individual refugee will have different negative beliefs. Of course, there'll be many in common, but it's an individual thing. Each person has their own negative ways of looking at things. Negative ways may be, in some sense, sometimes even fairly realistic. They're not necessarily greatly distorted or wrong, but they nonetheless typically exaggerate things or direct attention only to one possibility or one belief when there are other things that are also true. And they sometimes are exaggerated and made black and white, except and not be in the gray, but they are very often unhelpful, even if they are somewhat accurate or true. So We talk about the rationale, and the steps are to identify the unhelpful thoughts, to identify helpful thoughts they could use, and then rehearse the helpful thoughts, and then to go out and begin to practice them. What's great about this skill in the manual is there's a really nice document that gives categories of very common negative thoughts that disaster survivors have. I haven't looked back at it from the standpoint of refugees, and all of the SPR skills that I'm describing today, you have to give some serious thought to making sure they are a fit with the needs of the refugees. But I think it's likely that many of the categories will also show themselves with refugees, because they were designed to be categories that are common across many forms of trauma and many forms of both human caused and natural disaster. So, there's a helpful thinking handout, which makes it a lot easier to work with a person to identify unhelpful thoughts. And there's also, it also lists a lot of the kind of other ways of looking, other thoughts that are more adaptive and more helpful to people. So that's that skill. Today I don't have time to teach you all of these skills and exactly how to do them. That's something that, when we teach people skills for psychological recovery, it's a 2 or 3 day workshop, so that you get a chance to practice all the steps of the skills and role play it. And I encourage you to do that. But I think, you'll be able to look at the manual and get a lot, and then you'll be able to work together to practice the skills as you do it. Now, I want to very briefly just mention the sort of last skill. It's not called a skill, but it's information gathering and prioritizing assistance. And the goal here is to really decide if a referral is needed for more intensive support, because this was never intended to replace, psychotherapy. But also identify and prioritize the person's needs and concerns and decide which skills to teach. And I've already said that I think that identifying and prioritizing the needs of a person is in itself an intervention. It helps to make the world more predictable. It helps to break it down to size. It helps to empower the person's felt ability to do something to affect their situation. Now, there's a sense in which when you are going to play an important role, if you were to deliver SPR, one of your jobs is to really work with the client to decide, as you talk to them, which skill or which 2 or 3 skills would be most valuable to them. And so in some sense, we think, well, if a person has a different problem to solve that you find out about, then problem solving is very important. If they are having intense or repeated upsetting reactions, physical and emotional reactions is something that's happening, then managing reactions would likely be the primary first SPR skill you'd think of and do. If they don't know how to connect or reconnect with friends and family, or they don't have enough people around them that care about them or can help them, then healthy social connections would be important. If they're just feeling very depressed, sad, or withdrawn, then positive activities would be very important. If they're having negative thoughts that make them feel bad or stop them from having more positive, hopeful thoughts, then helpful thinking would be important. And also, if they have a serious health problem or a mental health condition or substance abuse problem or other current hardships and adversities, problem solving would be important. But always, the other skills will be important. If you have a difficult problem you need to solve, yes, problem solving you would do first, but healthy, rebuilding social connections would be important. Helpful thinking could be important. And so, many of the skills will happen for things, but there is a skill flow chart that suggests in general how you would choose the primary skill for most of the presenting kinds of problems that you would find with clients. Now, there is the steps here. Number one is identifying needs and concerns, but there's a second step, which I think is terrifically useful, and that not all counselors would naturally do, and that is called summarizing and prioritizing the concerns. So if you sit and talk with a person, they're going to tell you about a variety of things, right? I mean, every refugee is going to have 7 or 8 concerns, right? Or 15 concerns, but they're not going to have one concern. They're going to have a number of concerns. And it's too much to deal with. So part of the job of the counselor, as we see it in SPR, is to take notes as the person is describing their problems, and then to reflect it back to the person, summarize it, organize it and summarize it. So these are the problems that you've mentioned, and then ask them and work with them in a process of deciding which are the ones that are most important. Because you want to focus on ones that the individual wants help with, that they think are very big, are most important, that are causing serious distress or impairment of functioning, that need to be, for one reason or other, addressed sooner rather than later, maybe ones that are worsening over time, and also ones that if you tackle this problem, it's likely to reduce other problems. So you have an important role. You want to go with what the client wants to work on, but you also want to bring your judgment into the process and find a way to ensure that amongst the problems, the 1 or 2 problems you're going to be tackling first, or you're going to be using skills to address, are the ones that are that should be prioritized, and you're going to agree with that person, that prioritization. So that process of summarization back, and then going through a mutual process of prioritization. Like all the skills, it's meant to be a partnership. You're not just telling people do this, you're working with them. It's a two-way partnership. Yes, you want them to drive it. Your ideas are very important in all these skills too, because you have your judgment and you play an important role. So you should help to shape it. But that's the idea. And then you discuss, you can recommend which are the skills that you're going to teach them. You'll start with one skill in the first session, because you do the information gathering first, and then you do one skill in the first session, and then, but you can describe to them, well, why don't we focus on these 2 skills, because they seem to be, or these 3 skills, I think they map best onto your, the problems that you're facing and your needs now, and then we can always take stock as we go along. Now, I also just want to make a couple of comments. That's what I'm going to tell you today about SPR. I want to just a couple of comments about training and support in learning SPR. I'm assuming that many of you as psychologists, you might get interested in learning this yourself. And if you do, then the manual will be valuable to you. You may be able to find some people to help train you. You may be able to train yourselves. But I also assume that you may wind up training other people in these things, because you have greater knowledge than, and you need to activate other communities of helpers. And so we know that lectures are useful. Like what I'm doing today is useful. It's giving you information and giving you ideas and things like that. But it's not the ideal way to teach you skills, right? Most of you after today, you can't go out and you won't know how to follow the skills for psychological recovery because you won't remember what they are. Maybe if you have the manual in front of you, but you would get better at it if you do it and we talk about it, you practice it, you get feedback, you work out the kinks, and you find your own words and you become familiar with it. So it flows better and you can do it better. So this second kind of training, of course, is with interactive workshops, which take more time and give you a chance to learn the skills. And then more important, go out and role play the skills, get feedback from colleagues, role play it again. Typically, that kind of workshop where you role play something and role play it again, it's more difficult to find that because it takes rather a lot of time. In fact, one of my problems with skills for psychological recovery trainings that we do is there's not enough time for everybody to role play every skill, and particularly to do it multiple times. So think about opportunity to practice the skills. If you teach other people, and even for yourselves, it would be highly desirable for you to engage in supervision with the people learning the skills, because the optimal way to learn skills is to do the workshop, do the practice, then see some people and practice using the tools while getting supervision. You will almost certainly not be able to come up with, get supervisors who are expert in SPR or all these things. But I would suggest that you explore mutual supervision groups, that whatever skills you learn out of this next series of presentations you're getting, that you find a way to provide mutual supervision. If you're lucky, one or more of people in your group will be expert in this or have already know it or have learned the skill somewhere else, or maybe you can attract someone who is an expert to join it. But mutual supervision will be valuable because you're clever and you're knowledgeable, and you can all look at the manual and you can provide feedback for one another. So planning for learning, training, and supervision is going to be important. You might even be able to designate, some of you may want to take on roles as trainers and supervisors to help spread some of the things that your group is learning through this really wonderful education series. And I just finally want to make a couple of comments. It's an important one to me, which is comments on reaching the refugees. And that is, I would call it going to scale, right? Because you have 2 million people. So even if 10 or 15 or 20% of those individuals are probably at high risk for developing chronic PTSD, it's going to be a significant percentage. How do we give counseling to all those people? Well, it's difficult. So, the impact of the services that you and your nation and your Polish psychology colleagues all offer, the impact is going to be an interaction between the effectiveness and the reach of the intervention. So the more intensive things like evidence-based psychotherapies are more effective. The problem is you can only give them to very few people. On the other hand, certain things you can reach a lot of people with, like skills like psychological first aid, but their effectiveness is lower. They're not very powerful. So ideally, you want to hit a sweet spot between the effectiveness of what you're doing and the reach. So it's important to think in terms of population mental health, because that's your job in part, is to think about the population of refugees in Poland. And it's a little bit different because most of us are trained as individual therapists, and we provide one-to-one or small group services. So I'm encouraging you to kind of put on your thinking cap and be thinking about how do we support the entire population. And that's why I've made a big deal about some of these lower intensity interventions. And there are a number of things that you can do as organizers to get more impact. One is to begin to think how you can help organize activities for larger numbers of people and mobilize the refugee population to organize activities. Because as I've said, activities can improve mood, provide the places where people give and receive support, distract people from worry and concern, and improve their confidence in the future by giving them a sense of a return to normalcy, that they are capable of having good emotions and good experiences. And so some of the practices that we can organize are already familiar to people. People know they like to participate in sports. They like to listen to music. Many people keep journals. Many people do art, painting, writing, filming, performing. So if you can help organize ways for refugees to engage in sports, you strengthen their sense of person power, you improve their ability to physically relax, you increase their opportunities for social support and friendship with other people, even when they don't have to talk about the problems. You're building their social support without having them talk about their problems. And you can help them regain their old familiar identities that are important to them. Music enables calming, empowerment. It promotes energy. It gives a sense of pleasure and positive emotions. Journaling starts a process of emotional processing in a person, encourages standing back and reflection. Many people already like painting, writing, filming. You can bring them together and help them share those things. Particularly if you can foster self-help organizations and self-help groups amongst the refugees for mutual support, that can restore their hope and identity. It can enable them to help other people as well as help themselves. Often people have better ideas, give them better ideas for how to help each other. Being in control of the effort of the helping efforts is empowering for people. It improves their sense of predictability and control. Professionals like you can play a very important role in enabling them to get their self-help activities off the ground, to help them locate resources, to find space, to get media access, to build online platforms where they can support each other and talk and share events. And you can work with them to include your expertise, your psychoeducation. You can strengthen the mental health programming. I'm involved in a project that we're hoping to do in India with rural, poor Indian women in south of India. They have self-help groups for economics, for small business loans. And we're going to bring Group PM Plus into that so that they can include mental health practices in their self-help activities. And to the degree to which you can create a way for people to support each other using technology and media, maybe by helping them create a platform where they can communicate with one another, and maybe even create a website that is a national website where all of the helping organizations can put their stuff with lots of resources, including psychoeducational resources, training resources, manuals, handouts, PowerPoints. That kind of thing can be very, very important. And many people in a refugee community will come to these and will emerge as leaders themselves. So I encourage you to do everything you can to support the refugees, supporting one another. So I think I will stop there. I see that Iga has put into the chat most of the resources that we talked about. I know I've covered a lot of material and I hope it's been valuable. Are there any questions or comments? And Iga, I'll let you call this whenever you do. I know we don't have too much time, but I'm happy to answer any questions or comments if there are more.
Na ten moment nie mamy.
For now, we don't have any questions. Well, let me just say something. Well, it seems to me that what Joe has been talking about, this is very basic. It might even seem trivial when we organize certain things that to some people it's below the standard of a work of a psychotherapist professional. And here we can see that this is the kind of work that is very important. We hear it from a world expert, famous expert. So it's very important for us to understand what's very important in the process of recovery on every stage of that process. And I'm just wondering, Joe, how could we convince psychotherapists, professionals? Well, some psychotherapists believe that their work is really exceptional. Well, they do exceptional work, that's true. They get into very subtle areas of human functioning, but you're encouraging us to put all hands on deck and focus on what can be really helpful to those people and get involved in making their life easier and their functioning easier, because this will translate into their psychological recovery. How do you think we can encourage psychotherapists to get involved in this kind of work as well, apart from professional psychotherapy?
Well, I think, thank you. That is a very important point. And very often when we talk about disaster mental health, we do have that reaction, right? Because psychologists are highly skilled. They're trained in very advanced psychotherapies, and that's what we want to do. But I think that all of you as leaders and educators, as the knowledgeable people in the country, I think it's important for you to start a discussion with each other about this, about how do you help the refugees, because it really is a problem of scale. It's a problem of population mental health, because we have, you know, I don't know how many psychologists or therapists you have in the country. It's going to be a very finite number. By all means, use all of your skills to help the refugees. So you're going to, in the course, you're going to learn psychotherapies, right? I know that there are a number of them. I've looked through the course content. So deliver those, and that's good. And the more you can do that, the better. But you will only touch less than 1%. You'll touch 1 in 1,000 people that need your assistance. So I would encourage you to start this discussion. The activities that I'm describing, especially the ones, even SPR, requires you to do something more similar and more limited than what you have traditionally done. But if you want to help 10 people instead of 1 person, then it's a path for you if you believe that's important. But more important, you are the people that would be capable of helping these kinds of community activities and strengthening the self-help and the gatherings and the organization of the refugees and doing these lesser intensity things. You are very important, because they won't include the best psychological ideas, and they won't really necessarily well address the mental health of people unless you are there to give guidance and support. It requires you to stretch yourselves and to experiment with different roles. You know, over the course of my career, I learned to work with community groups and advise and train people in the affected communities. It's a challenge. You will find it extremely rewarding. And your knowledge, your advanced knowledge is really important, but you have to figure out a way to make it simple enough that it will make sense and will affect people. So I think that that is one of your biggest challenges. You have a community of psychological people, of psychologists and experts in psychology in your country. The task you face is, how can you use your knowledge and use your human expertise to build a system that will help the refugee community in the best way you can. By all means, go out and deliver the sophisticated psychotherapies. By all means, do that. I am a fan of those. I oversaw over 13 years, I oversaw bringing prolonged exposure into the VA healthcare system and trained thousands of providers in evidence-based psychotherapy. I recommend that, but that's not the most valuable or important thing that you as Polish psychologists can do. I think you need to build bridges to the communities and design systems and get involved in supporting larger scale gatherings and activities. And I know it's a very unusual thing, but I hope you would do that in addition to using your more sophisticated theories and psychological intervention skills. But I support those too and do those as well.
Super, dzięki wielkie za te
Yes,
słowa.
thank you very much for these words of encouragement. We really need to learn how to implement that on a daily basis, because we're just at the beginning of all the challenges. We have a lot to do in the coming in the coming days, weeks, and it's good that we have people like you, Joe, to contribute and to support us in this, to take this direction and to note how important it is what you're talking about. So thank you very much. It's great to be working with you, and we hope to meet you many times again, because this scope and long-term nature of all these activities are really something that we can be sure of. So thank you for your expertise, thank you for your contribution, and thank you for everything you've said about supporting the community of refugees. So thank you very much once again, and see you.
Well, let me just thank you for the opportunity and the honor. And I have seen it, you know, I was lucky in a way, I feel, to talk to you at the beginning of your series, because I want to expand your thinking and ask you to take some risks and become more experimental in your professional roles, because I think that that will be what would be most valuable and also very exciting for you as individuals. And I'll help any way I can. I also want to honor and thank you for what you're all what you're doing and what you're going to do. It's very important, and you know, I'm proud to see that the psychologist community in Poland is stepping up and giving some thought to what you can best contribute. So thank you for the work that you're doing and you're going to do. And a very great pleasure meeting you. And I hope to see you in Poland one day. Okay.
Już cię widzimy w Polsce, już cię widzimy.
Yeah, we can already see you in Poland.
That's you can.
And in
yes.
Ukraine, and in Ukraine. You're
And
in
that's wonderful.
Ukraine.
And good luck to our Ukrainian colleagues as well. And good luck to you all. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Good luck.
Bardzo wszystkim dziękujemy
I want to thank everybody for participation, for supporting us, for supporting KIK in their activities. We are aware of the fact that there's a lot to be done. We'll be supporting one another, and we will see you on Tuesday. We have another star that will be Paul Gilbert talking on compassion.
Great.
Another important area.
Goodbye, everybody, and good luck.
Dzięki. Dziękujemy uprzejmie. Dzięki Państwu wszystkim.
Thank you.
Kochani Państwo, tutaj nasi współpracujący z nami, cudowni jesteście. Naprawdę idzie to tłumaczenie rewelacyjne. Ja nawet nie myślałam, że tak można pięknie tłumaczyć. A tu tyle wspaniałych i ważnych słów. Także dzięki wielkie i do wtorku.